Okay, welcome everybody, and pursuing to Standing Order 1082, our study on the situation in Hong Kong. I would like to welcome and take the time to welcome Martin Lee, who is with us today, and I want to thank you for taking time to be here, and also to Gloria Fung, who's also with us as well. Gloria, you're with the Canada-Hong Kong link, I believe, so that's great. And I know, Mr. Lee, maybe you'll tell us a bit more about yourself, but I know that you have been a lawyer, you've been a legislator, you've started parties, you've been involved, and you've been very active on the human rights front. And I think for my colleagues, just to mention very briefly, that as far as being a champion of human rights, Mr. Lee has received numerous awards. I know he's received the 1995 International Human Rights Award by the American Bar Association, the Prize for Freedom by the Liberal International in 1996, the Democracy Award by the United States National Endowment for Democracy, and in 1997, the Schumann Medal in 2000, which Lee was first non-European to receive the European People's Party and European Democrats. So very much involved in the champion of human rights. We're looking forward to us giving us an update on what's going on in Hong Kong these days. After you've had a chance with your opening statement, then what we'll do is we'll move around the room and have our members ask questions and find out more information. So welcome, Mr. Lee. We're glad to have you here. I turn the floor over to you for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, honourable members, for having us. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the wonderful weather you have organized for us. Hong Kong is at a crossroads. If Hong Kong can proceed from now, according to the blueprint laid down for Hong Kong by Deng Xiaoping in the early 1980s, Hong Kong will have a bright future, and I dare say so will China. But if Hong Kong were to go down the slippery slope as now, Hong Kong will become soon just another Chinese city. So this is a very important point in our history. 18 years after the handover of sovereignty on the 1st of July, 1997. I have prepared a short brief for you, Mr. Chairman and honourable members, so I won't go into that. But I think it is important to look at Hong Kong. We must do so in the context of China and in the context of Canada and China relations. I will start by saying that there is no inconsistency between a good policy for China and Hong Kong and your foreign policy of democracy, freedoms, and human rights. They are perfectly consistent. Some people think that if you want to have China trade, then you better be quiet on human rights issues and so on. Let me say that this is a wrong approach. China has no respect for any country which is in their pocket. China respects a government which believes in fairness. So the two things are not inconsistent. China trade and your concern for human rights and freedom and democracy for Hong Kong. We have been promised by China that we would continue to enjoy all our core values under British rule for 50 years from the 1st of July 1997 without change. But in order for that to happen, both the Chinese and British governments have agreed in their agreement called the Sino-British Joint Declaration that there would have to be a sea change in our political structure. Under British rule, the governor was appointed by the British government in the name of the Queen and sent to Hong Kong to govern us without any prior consultation with the people of Hong Kong at all. And once he got to Hong Kong, he would then appoint every single legislator in our legislature. And not only that, he would preside in all the Legislative Council sittings. So if any legislator were to appear to him to be troublesome, that guy will not be reappointed. So that system, that colonial structure had to go according to the Joint Declaration, which prescribes that we would have an elected chief executive and an elected legislature. That is the only way, I would submit, that Hong Kong people could really rule Hong Kong with a high degree of autonomy. And these are the words used by Mr. Deng Xiaoping when he said one country, two systems. But how could Hong Kong people rule Hong Kong with a high degree of autonomy when the people of Hong Kong don't even elect their leader and all members of the legislature? That is the problem. Now, the basic law, which is our mini-constitution, in fact spelled out these promises of elected government in the Joint Declaration in much greater detail in the basic law, providing that 10 years after the handover, that is, by 2007, we could have an elected chief executive and all members of the legislature. And so we patiently waited. Beijing said no. So we waited for another 5 years, we thought, hoping that by 2012 we could have it. Beijing said no again. And we had to wait until 2017, so said Beijing, before we could elect our chief executive by universal suffrage. And if that went through successfully, we could then, in 2020, elect all members of our legislature. Unfortunately, after 10 years of waiting, Beijing decided on the 31st of August last year that although Beijing would certainly allow Hong Kong people one person, one vote in the election of our next chief executive in 2017, when it comes to the nomination process, Beijing would call the shots. In other words, Hong Kong people would only be able to elect among 2 or 3 candidates, all of whom will be pre-selected by a Beijing-controlled nomination committee. In other words, Beijing will pick puppet A, puppet B, or if we are lucky, even puppet C, for us to elect. Such a type of election certainly doesn't come within international standards. Of course, in Hong Kong, the Joint Declaration already prescribes that the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights applies to Hong Kong. And basic law, our Constitution itself, prescribes by Article 26 that all Hong Kong permanent residents have not only the right to elect, but the right to stand for elections. So what was decided by Beijing last year was clearly contrary to all these promises. In fact, it is also unconstitutional, but I will not go into that until perhaps you ask me questions on that. It would take me too long for that. Now, so how do we go from here? The democratic camp of legislators, who amount to more than 1/3, have vowed that they would vote against any bill proposed by the government, which is within the confines of the decision in Beijing on the 31st of August. So if they restrict Hong Kong people's right of nomination of the candidates in 2017, these legislators will vote against it. Now, this particular bill under the Basic Law requires a 2/3 majority, a special majority of 2/3 of all the legislators before it could go through. And we have more than 1/3. So we could block it. Now, are we going to block it? And if we block it, what happens next? Everything remains to be seen, because it would depend on the paramount leader of China, Mr. Xi Jinping. He has been seen to be amassing power unto himself. He was described by the Time magazine last year as Emperor Z. Now, if he really wants power for the sake of power and to become an emperor, Hong Kong will soon become a Chinese city. But if he should prove to be a reformer, having got power unto himself, then there is hope for China and hope for Hong Kong. And I hope the Canadian government and the Canadian Parliament will speak up for us at this difficult stage. You have every moral obligation to do so, because Beijing, in fact, appealed to your support when the Joint Declaration was first announced. Beijing wanted the world to support the joint declaration between Britain and China, because Beijing was afraid that there will be too much emigration from Hong Kong if Hong Kong people have no hope in their future. So the Canadian government, having been lobbied successfully by China to support the joint declaration, certainly owes a moral obligation to the Hong Kong people when things are going wrong. You cannot be accused of interfering in China's internal affairs because China had lobbied for international support. So I would leave some time for my colleague.
Mr. Chairperson, honorable members of the Standing Committee, thank you very much for giving us this chance to testify on the critical situation in Hong Kong and also the importance of protecting democracy, autonomy, and also rule of law in Hong Kong, which has a very deep and close connection with Canada. Supporting the people of Hong Kong in defense of their human rights and also democratic rights is vital in building strong and respectful foreign policy in Canada. Canada has a stake in the current crisis in Hong Kong for 4 reasons. Number one, as one of the countries endorsing the joint declaration signed in 1984, Canada has a moral duty to urge China to respect and honor what they have promised to Hong Kong people in respect to one country, two systems, Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong with a high degree of autonomy. Number two, democracy, freedom, and rule of law are the bedrock principles of our foreign policy. We are morally obligated to defend these basic civil rights of the Hong Kong people. Number three, it serves our national best interest to defend the rights of our Canadian citizens living in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is Asia's most Canadian city, with its 300,000 Canadians and also over 200 Canadian companies based there. Hong Kong is Asia's 3rd largest financial market. Without the rule of law, freedom and civil liberties, there won't be any guarantee of a level playing field for Canadian-owned businesses or personal security for Canadians in Hong Kong. Number four, there are very strong people-to-people ties between Hong Kong and Canada. Last year, numerous community organizations, student groups, and national organizations have rallied to show their support to Hong Kong. The all-party motion of the House of Commons calling on China to respect international agreements are not only well received by Hong Kong people, but it will also have a positive impact on China in the long run. But we all need to do more at this critical time, with the people of Hong Kong threatened by ongoing erosion of their basic human rights. We therefore respectfully recommend, number one, that the Standing Committee undertake a full study of the critical situation in Hong Kong and submit a report to the Parliament to serve as reference in the formulating of government policies on this issue. Number two, the Government of Canada issue an official statement urging China to honor and respect commitments to the joint declaration and the promise of universal suffrage to Hong Kong people before the chief executive election format is decided by the Legislative Council of Hong Kong by mid-2015. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to start our first round with Mr. Dewar from the NDP. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for very clear, concise statements. I just want to start, Chair, by acknowledging the recent work of the UK Parliament, who recently just tabled a report in the UK Parliament. And I just want to read what the report said, and it's relevant to our discussions today. From that report on Hong Kong, They said the preservation of both the letter and the spirit of the joint declaration is crucial to Hong Kong's economic and business success. Recent debates over electoral reform have exposed deep divisions in Hong Kong and a wide divergence of expectations for its political future. In addition to debates on constitutional reform, we heard widespread concern that the autonomy, rights and freedoms guaranteed to Hong Kong in the joint declaration and basic law have gradually eroded in recent years. A free press and the right to demonstrate peacefully are essential to the functioning of a free society and are among the most crucial pillars upholding Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy. I couldn't agree more, and I think what we've heard today, particularly Canada's role in acknowledging with our good friends in China the 84 process that led to the 97 agreement. And I want to state that we believe, certainly as the official opposition, and I think many of my colleagues around the table, that we have a critical role to play, as Mr. Lee stated, Mr. Chair. And that is that we need to see Canada being a responsible actor, having good relations with China. To say all we're simply affirming is what was agreed to, both in 84, in 97, and for the path forward. And I'm interested because Mr. Lee did say, Mr. Chair, that and acknowledged, which I think is important, the trajectory of this, a very similar history to Canada's history, you know, having a governor appointed and then appointees to a legislative body. We went through that in our history. But he also said something very important, Mr. Chair, and it leads to my question, is that Deng Xiaoping had been the, if you will, had the vision of this as leader of China. And it is in keeping with his vision that this agreement be honored. And so my question to Mr. Lee, through you, Chair, is we know that he's had pressure from officials, et cetera, and just recently, just this past Monday, for his participation in the democratic protests. But I wonder if you could tell us, Mr. Chair, what is happening on the ground with people in Hong Kong. It's been quiet for the last number of weeks, months even, and I'm wanting to get from him exactly what is happening on the ground. What can he tell us about how people are feeling and what people are doing to advocate for China and Beijing and officials to adhere to the commitment of both 84 and 97. Thank you, Chair.
Well, the Pan-Democrats in the Legislative Council have reaffirmed their refusal to vote in support of any bill which is going to be presented to the Legislative Council based on the 31st August decision of last year. And they have just affirmed it 2 days ago. And of course, as far as the university and secondary school students were concerned who participated in this beautiful umbrella movement, they are now all back to universities or schools, studying hard, I hope. Now, but these young people, having been baptized into democracy, have got in their hearts, each of them, the fire of democracy burning. And no iron fist is going to quench that fire in future. So that gives me great hope. Because instead of old people like me continuing to fight for democracy, now we have a totally new generation. And of course, it is Hong Kong's future. I remember in the early days of this movement, umbrella movement, young Joshua Wong, who just turned 18 at that time, said, I'm going to fight for democracy for me and my next generation. A young guy of 18, fighting for democracy for the next generation. And when I heard that, I thought to myself, I could now retire. Instead of me fighting for him, he's now fighting for the next generation. So, yes, things have quietened down, but everybody's waiting for the government to produce a bill to the Legislative Council, which is going to happen maybe within the next month or two. But the decision is going to be made in Beijing. Now, that is the all-important thing. Because if the Beijing leader, the paramount leader, Xi Jinping, were to say, if he has the wisdom and the commitment and the vision, he could well overturn what has been done during these 18 years. That is, of the Chinese government departing from the blueprint of Deng Xiaoping. He can certainly and easily bring us back to that blueprint.
Well, and if I may, Chair, one of the things that I find interesting is that, in fact, what has been laid out by Deng Xiaoping before and is an opportunity for the present government is to actually be more progressive and enlightened than the predecessors. Because in fact, what we see is that this roadmap is allowing people to have a say, to vote, and the choice within, of course, and a really important underline here, the two systems, one country. So it is a real opportunity if the leadership chooses to embrace this. I just want, in the time I have, is how important it is, and maybe I'll just leave this as a statement, what we heard from Ms. Fung and from Mr. Lee, but is that this committee, if we can, to do a follow-up to this and to at least recommend to government what was recommended, and simply that our government express its commitment to the 84, the 97 agreement, and that we are seized with that as a committee, and perhaps we can follow up with that after. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to add, some of my observation of the umbrella movement in Hong Kong. This movement has been joined by people from all walks of life, men and women, young and old. And the most amazing part is that a lot of young people have come forward to take ownership of the city. And we always say afterwards that Hong Kong is never the same as before. Just recently, Canada Hong Kong Link had organized a sharing with the student leaders in Hong Kong. And they told us that they have spent their future time in integrating with the grassroots and also educating the grassroots as, why it is so important for them to come forward to fight for genuine universal suffrage instead of, the handpicked electorates by the Beijing government. And I think it's really good if the committee can organize a full study of the Hong Kong situation in the future so as to enable more representatives from Hong Kong to be able to share their views with all of you.
Thank you very much. We're going to move over to Mr. Han for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and ni hao and xie for being here. I've had some contact in Edmonton with the Hong Kong Canada Business Association. It's very dynamic and profitable organization for both countries. Mr. Lee, how much confidence or hope, realistic hope, do you have in Mr. Xi being the reformer that you hope he is? And can the opposition legislatures in Hong Kong, is there enough strength there to effectively at least vote against or try to block the legislation if he is not the reformer that you hope he is?
Certainly, the Pan-Democrats could block it. There's no doubt they could block it. We have enough votes. And at the moment, I don't see anyone going to the other side. Now, as to Mr. Xi, of course, nobody can be certain because he has been hitting these tigers, as we say in Chinese, these corrupt tigers. And these are real tigers. And so even he is finding it not an easy job at all, but he is hitting at corruption harder than any other of his predecessors. And the next thing he also did, which gives me some hope, is that he has just introduced a new state policy, which is to govern the country, to rule the country by law. Now, of course, it's not good enough for you and me, because we would have liked not rule by law, but rule of law. But at least is a starter. So I hope that he is a man of vision, and he could actually lead us back to Deng Xiaoping's way. Because, Mr. Chairman and members, I believe when Deng Xiaoping came up with this idea of one country, two systems, he did not mean it only for Hong Kong or Taiwan or Macau, but he also intended that policy to apply to the rest of China. That is why he said Hong Kong must keep what we have under British rule for 50 years without change, but at the same time having democracy to bolster these, to protect these core values. And he wanted Hong Kong to remain high, and he obviously reckoned that China would take about 50 years to catch up with us. And that is why he said 50 years. In fact, this was confirmed when the secret documents were released in Britain after 30 years. So there was a document recording a meeting between Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping in Beijing on the 19th of December 1984, exactly on the same day when the joint declaration was actually signed in Beijing. And that document recorded Deng Xiaoping's words. And it said, some Japanese friends asked, why 50 years? He explained to Mrs. Margaret Thatcher. He said, because we want China to be at par with the rest of the developed countries. And I reckon it would take 50 years. So he wanted China to go up. And of course, if you look at China today, there is no socialism being practiced there, or communism. It is capitalism. But in Mr. Deng Xiaoping's words, capitalism with Chinese characteristics. Sorry, socialism with Chinese characteristics. That means capitalism. All right? So he obviously was looking at Hong Kong, a Chinese city with the rule of law and all our human rights and a level playing field, corruption well under control. And he obviously wanted China to go down that route. That is why he sat down in this policy, one country, two systems. He meant it also for China to catch up with us. And that is why I'm confident that if Mr. Xi, the present leader, has got power into himself, has got rid of the corrupt tigers, hopefully he would go down the road of reform. And what better signal for him to give to the rest of the world that he means business, that he is a reformer, when he actually allows Hong Kong people to have democracy as it was already promised to us.
I couldn't agree more. And one of the things about things changing and people advancing and so on is that change, I think, probably has to come from within eventually in China, in mainland China. We spent some time in Taiwan last year, and one of the topics of discussion was what will it take to change China into more free market, freer society and so on. And one of the comments was the more that Chinese people from the PRC spend time in Taiwan and Hong Kong and other places, the more they're going to demand the things that they see the people of Taiwan having and the people of Hong Kong having and the people of other parts of the world having. So what's your sort of assessment of, you said 50 years, maybe it's 50, maybe it's 100, but what's your assessment of the power, ultimate power of the people of China to change China from within, and somebody like Mr. Xi, seeing that coming and basically getting out in front of that parade?
Yes, it's quite right. When people are educated overseas, I mean, they see the world. I mean, a lot of Chinese students are studying here. They go back. And the important thing is, any good leader of China, and I hope Mr. Xi is one of them, will see, all right, now China is now the world's second largest economy. But how do you sustain it without a corresponding political structure? How can you, after killing all the corrupt tigers, what do you do next? How do you keep the country free from corruption? You've got to have a system. In fact, Deng Xiaoping said it many years ago. When there is a good system, even evil men cannot do evil. But when there is no good system, even good men cannot do good, but may be forced to do evil. That good system, I suggest, must be a democratic system. So a good leader will say, okay, now that China has economic power, what's next? If you want to sustain it, he must make sure that China will go down the democratic way, like all the other countries in the world. And Hong Kong is just the best place to begin with democracy in China, because they have already promised that to us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Han. Mr. Gardner-Su, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for being here today to offer your testimony and to answer our questions. one question I have, in talking about the joint declaration as well as the basic law, the question of elections and of course the very big issue of pre-selection of candidates. Is there anything in any of the writing of either the joint declaration or whatever documentation exists and the basic law that spells out specifically whether or not the selection is based on a pre-selection coming ordained by China, or whether that detail was left unsaid?
Yes. Now, first of all, the joint declaration itself only talked about broad principles because it's an international agreement. But the joint declaration itself says quite specifically that China's basic policy on Hong Kong, which was already set out in the joint declaration, will be further set out in a basic law for Hong Kong, where more details were in fact given. So that in both Article 45 and Article 68 of the basic law, it is said that the election of the chief executive, Article 45, and the election of the entire legislature, Article 68, for both of these elections, the ultimate goal is to have universal suffrage. But Article 39 prescribes that the provisions of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights are to continue to apply to Hong Kong. And that covenant, of course, then sets out effectively that they will be elected democratically. And the basic law, as I said, itself, Article 26, says that all Hong Kong permanent residents would have the right to elect and the right to stand for election. And indeed, the United Nations Human Rights Committee has already ruled that the election has to be genuine and fair. And so there must not be too much unnecessary restriction to the right to stand for elections. Now, at the moment, what Beijing has said is they must love the country. The candidates must love the country. Well, it is a good thing. But how do you spell it out in the law? Who decides whether anyone of the ladies and gentlemen here loves the country or loves the country enough to be in China, well, of course, to be in Hong Kong, to be chief executive? I mean, and they will decide, oh, this guy is not a patriot. I mean, that restriction totally is wrong. So I think you look at the basic law, look at the joint declaration, and look at the international covenants, and together it has to be a meaningful election. Hong Kong people must be given a real choice. Now, the nomination procedure is prescribed actually in the basic law, Article 45, to say that there will be a nomination committee, broadly representative. And of course, the best and the most and the broadest representative way is to have all the members of the nomination committee to be elected by one person, one vote, which is an indirect type of election, as in the election of the U.S. president. So it's indirect. Now, I don't mind that, but it cannot be right that Beijing could effectively control the constitution of such a nomination committee. The Standing Committee of the NPC actually decided in this decision on the 31st of August last year that the nomination committee would consist of 1,200 people following the present election committee of the chief executive. And these 1,200 members would be elected in the same way as under the now existing system for election committee. That is, they would be elected not one person, one vote, but by functional constituency type of elections. Now, this is very old. I was told that Mussolini had it. Indonesia had it about 20 years ago. But Hong Kong is probably the only country which still has it. And so it's one lawyer, one vote, one engineer, one vote for some of those. When it comes to the commercial side, it's one company, one vote. So a rich man will have many votes because he's got many companies. All right? So this is totally unfair. And that is why I said in my opening that if we go down this route, the nomination committee will be controlled by Beijing. At the moment, if you look at the present election committee of the chief executive of 1,200, Beijing controls at least 950 out of 1,200. And Beijing decided last year that anybody who wants to be a candidate in the election of the chief executive in 2017 must have the support of at least 50% of the 1,200 members of the nomination committee. They control 950. How could we put up somebody with 600 votes? So that is why they want to control it.
Very quickly, two questions. Of course, we've seen the umbrella movement. It has been covered quite a bit in the news. And those are, from the appearances, a lot of young people, as you said, who may have been born after 1997 or close to there. How does the Hong Kong population in general feel about this issue? And secondly, apart from this issue, how would you describe relations between China and Hong Kong?
Now, this issue has turned out to be very divisive. And I would say it was because our chief executive, no doubt, at the direction of Beijing, wants to divide the community. For many, many years, even after the handover, the Hong Kong community is a very harmonious one. I remember, people will, yes, they belong to different parties like here, all right? But they're very polite, even though they don't agree with you politically. But this particular movement has resulted in the community being totally polarized. Because whenever the pro-democracy people hold a demonstration, Beijing will make sure that there is a counter demonstration. And it's documented in many press reports that these people were paid to protest against our protesters, all right? And then there's a scuffle. And so it's very divisive. But public opinion polls show that although a lot of people were inconvenienced, including me, when you go to work, I mean, you're inconvenienced because they were occupying Central, where my chambers are, and Causeway Bay and Mong Kok. These were busy districts. All right? So a lot of people were inconvenienced. But surprisingly, very few people were really very angered by these things. And the relationship between China and Hong Kong, in one word, it could be immediately improved if Mr. Xi Jinping were not only to give Hong Kong people the vote, but to give the Hong Kong people the right to stand for elections. It will be completely harmonized again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's all the time we have. We'll start one more round for 5 minutes. We've got three speakers here. Mr. Goldring, we're going to start with you for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And welcome. Thank you for being here, Mr. Lee and Ms. Fung. And I suppose if we were to abide by the letter that was received from the Chinese ambassador, that perhaps we wouldn't be meeting here today. But fortunately, this is Canada. And I have a question along the line of the thoughts. And what I'd like to know, Mr. Fung, is what is Britain saying about this? Have they expressed any direct concerns, or are they involved in trying to bring about adherence to the original agreement? What have they been doing? Have they been communicating any concerns for this too?
May I take this one? The British government, until recently, has been very disappointing because it is a signatory. So it has every legal right to say to the Chinese government, hey, look here, what's happening? But they chose not to. And I have to say that their foreign policy on Hong Kong is simply, give us more China trade, please. Now, I choose words carefully, but I'm afraid that is how they have behaved in the past. But recently, Parliament, though, did the right thing. The House of Commons Select Committee on Foreign Affairs has just come up with a long report on Hong Kong. And in fact, it was referred to earlier. Now, I would urge honourable members to take a look at it. And it has actually criticized the British government at various places. And I hope that the British government will do the honourable thing on Hong Kong and not just think of its China trade. Because to begin with, as I said in my opening, the two things are not inconsistent. They are not mutually exclusive. If Britain were to honour her obligations and duties under the Joint Declaration and defend the aspirations of the Hong Kong people of democracy, which was already promised to us in the Basic Law, and there's no doubt in my mind that Beijing would respect them instead of treating them already in their pocket.
And with the legislation that's been proposed in the United States, how is that being received there? Is there any indication on its level of support that it might receive? And what are the specifics of it? What are they calling for?
Well, in fact, the legislation has yet to be produced. And this is why it's shocking. When you, no doubt some of you might have read the Hong Kong government's position and the Chinese government's position too at the moment, at least up to now, is pocket it first. Pocket it first, which is a Chinese expression, is not good enough. But you better take it first, rather than not to have anything. And half a loaf of bread is better than nothing. But how on earth can we pocket it first when I don't even see what it is? And yet they are so ridiculous to say, okay, now Beijing has already made these decisions. All right, in our bill presented to you in the near future, we cannot go outside that decision. But we haven't decided yet, all right? But please tell me that you're going to pocket it first. Now, once you say pocket it first, the obvious logical question is, what comes next? And they won't even tell us either. So why do I pocket it first when I don't even know what is to come later? So this is absolutely absurd.
With the agreement that was signed, were there not any specifics on a time frame? There were specifics maybe on what would happen, but were there any specifics on when they would happen?
No time frame in the Joint Declaration, except that one country, two systems would last only for 50 years. At first, I thought it would take place immediately, because the Joint Declaration was signed in 1984, but to take effect in 1997. So I thought we could already set in place democratic elected legislature during that time, at least have everything ready, all right? But then the Basic Law says during the first 10 years after the handover, we cannot have universal suffrage yet. But after 10 years, we could. So that means I thought we would just wait for 10 out of the 50 years. But now, it's already been postponed to 2017, even if it comes about. It's already 20 years down the road.
Okay, thank you.
That's all the time we have. Thank you. We're going to move over to Mr. Dewar for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to ask a bit about, I think we've established very clearly that what Canada's role could be, what we've seen from other governments, UK, and clearly the historical relationship we have both with China and Hong Kong, and worthy of noting and reminding for the record how many Canadians are in Hong Kong, over 300,000. I want to ask Chair Ms. Fung a question about what's happening with people here in Canada. How can people help support what is happening, as well as other instances around the world where people are supporting? Because I think what we're hearing today is very important. And I really want to underline this point of view that this is about having good relations with China and being responsible actors at the same time. So I'd just like to hear from you about some of the things that are happening within the Canadian context, community, and how people are responding, as well as some other examples globally around how people are responding and supporting what I think is a very straightforward ask, and that is just the commitment to adhere to the 97 agreement.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Actually, within Canada, over the last 1.5 years, ever since the starting of the so-called Occupy Central movement, I can see that even within Canada, a lot of Canadians, particularly those people who are originally from Hong Kong, they are very, very concerned what is happening in Hong Kong. Because if you go back to before 1997, there was a wave of immigration from Hong Kong to Canada as well as other parts of the world. But after 1997, because people see that, oh, maybe there's not really that much change, so maybe we can go back. But now, over the last 1 year, we see another wave of immigration. And according to one of the figures that I have just obtained from Hong Kong, in 2014, 21,709 people applied for a certificate of no criminal record. And of course, this does not imply that all of them will immigrate elsewhere, but at least they are hatching political uncertainty in Hong Kong. And a lot of people within Hong Kong, they are very frustrated with the bad governance of the present Hong Kong SAR government, who are mostly handpicked by Beijing without any accountability towards the citizens in Hong Kong. And within Canada, over the last 1.5 years, a lot of young people as well as first-generation immigrants from Hong Kong, they have joined force with us to stage a lot of rally, public forum, as well as petition letter, in order to show the support towards Hong Kong. And we are also joined by Canadians who are not from Hong Kong. Say, for instance, we have the Canadian Federation of University Students. We also have Canadian Labour Congress and also UNIFOR joining us. And we also have the professors and also students from the academic circle joining us. Just very recently, we have 3 seminars in 3 universities. One at U of Waterloo, one at U of T, and then we also have, another forum with the non-Chinese Canadians. So you can see a lot of interest and a lot of concern have been built up around Canadians. And globally, there was also a network called the Global Solidarity for Hong Kong being set up ever since last year. And it consists of members from over 60 countries. And every day, people on Facebook, they just tweet out messages as what could be done all over the world in order to synchronize the kind of action, support action that we can stage for Hong Kong. And now we have members from, I think, of more than 60,000 people from different countries. And even up to now, they still continue with their organizing back in their country. So in Toronto, we are probably one of the most advanced organizations because we are the only city in the world that have joined the pop vote that was organized last June. And I see this kind of aspiration among Canadians here, and we hope that the Standing Committee will also take this into consideration and see what we can do in order to allow our citizens to understand better what is going on in Hong Kong.
Thank you very much. We're going to wrap up with Mr. Schellenberger. 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your testimony today. It seems to me as if signed agreements do not seem to be respected. Not only do we see this in Hong Kong, but in Ukraine, where deals are made or documents are signed to be implemented somewhere down the road or not implemented somewhere down the road. So do governments sign the agreements only for photo ops and hopes that 10 or 20 years from now they'll be gone and somebody else can deal with the situation? Mm-hmm. Or are these are these things signed really with due respect that they should receive? What's your feeling on that?
When the joint declaration was being negotiated between the British and the Chinese governments back in the 1980s, if I can go back to Deng Xiaoping's words, what he said to Margaret Thatcher, he said that, well, to have an agreement under which we take back Hong Kong is not going to be difficult. I mean, you could simply tell the British, get out. But he says it won't be right unless it is supported by the people of Hong Kong. So he made it a condition precedent to the agreement. And now he actually got it, because at the time, Hong Kong people, some were very reluctant, others saw in it a possibility of there being a successful future for Hong Kong, even though many people, I suppose, in their hearts would have preferred some other means of settlement. I, for one, went along with that, but starting from day one of the joint declaration, I made it my business to hold China to every promise contained in it. Because to my mind, if you let one promise go, the whole thing may collapse. And it has to be, everything is tied together. And that is why for all these years, I have done my best, or at least try my best, to hold China to all these promises. Now, it could still work if Xi Jinping were to go back to Deng Xiaoping's actual blueprint. But one of the important premises is that the Chinese leaders must trust the Hong Kong people. How can you have one country, two systems when there is no mutual trust? But now the trouble is, although the Democrats in the Assembly, in the Legislative Council, have more votes every time there was election in Hong Kong than their opposite parties, they are simply ignored in the Legislative Council because their superiority in voter support outside the Legislative Council is not translated into an equal number of seats, or at least proportionate, because we have a very unfair method of elections because of these functional constituency type of elections, which still accounts for half of the legislature. And so the government keeps on ignoring the Democrats within the council. And that is the problem, and that has to be redressed. But I hope, Mr. Chairman and honourable members, I hope your support of Hong Kong would be non-partisan, because that is the case in the US Congress, and that has been the case in the UK Parliament. You are stronger when you are united.
Yeah, I would also like to add one point to your question here. Actually, late last year, when Britain tried to send a delegation to review the implementation of the joint declaration in Hong Kong, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China publicly announced that the joint declaration was no longer in effect beginning from July 1st, 1997. Now, what that implies is that, China does not, honor and respect what they have promised before. And if the international community, including Canada, remains silent about this, then how can we trust that whatever agreements and contracts we sign with China in the future will be honored? I think we need to pay attention to this kind of pattern, because it will also have an impact on Canada in the future.
Mr. Chairman, may I correct that? I hate to do this to my colleague. The statement was made by the number 2 in the Chinese embassy in London, saying that the joint declaration is no longer effective, meaning that China already got Hong Kong back. All right? But that was not an official statement. I better put it on record.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much. And to my colleagues, thank you very much to Ms. Fung and to Mr. Lee. Thank you for the testimony today. You've given the committee some things to think about, okay? Thank you. With that, meeting's adjourned.